Welcome back, history lovers. Imagine a single day, September 22nd, holding secrets, revolutionary decisions, groundbreaking inventions, and cultural milestones that changed the course of nations and the world as we know it. On this day, a young American patriot faced death for daring to fight for freedom. A president made a decision that would alter the fate of millions, and a simple invention changed the way we enjoy our favorite desserts. But that's just the beginning. Later, the seeds of one of the bloodiest wars in the Middle East were sown, and decades later, millions of viewers tuned in to laugh with six friends who became television legends. How could all of this really happen on the same date? Stay with us as we uncover the fascinating stories, hidden details, and the untold consequences of September 22nd stories that might just surprise you, shock you, and make you rethink history itself. Let's travel back to 1776. The American Revolution was raging, and New York City had just fallen under British control. The streets were tense, red-coated soldiers patrolled every corner, and whispers of betrayal and rebellion floated through the air. Amidst this chaos, a young man stepped forward, just 21 years old, educated at Yale, and burning with patriotism. His name was Nathan Hale. Unlike many of his peers, Hale wasn't a hardened soldier or a career spy. He was a schoolteacher turned officer in the Continental Army. But when General Washington needed volunteers willing to cross enemy lines and gather intelligence on British troop movements, Hale didn't hesitate. He said yes, knowing full well the risk. Spying in the 18th century wasn't the sophisticated business of codebreakers and satellites. It was raw, dangerous, and almost always a death sentence if you were caught. Spies were seen not as prisoners of war but as traitors, stripped of honor, and executed without mercy. And yet, Hale disguised himself as a schoolmaster loyal to the crown and slipped behind British lines. For days, he gathered valuable intelligence sketching maps, noting fortifications and trying to understand the enemy's next moves. But fate was cruel. Reports suggest he was betrayed, possibly by a loyalist or even recognized by his own cousin fighting for the British. Captured near Flushing Bay, Hale was brought before General William Howe, interrogated, and swiftly sentenced to hang. On the morning of September 22, 1776, Nathan Hale faced the gallows. He stood tall, calm, and unshaken. Before the noose was tightened, he spoke the words that would echo through history. "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." Think about that for a moment. 21 years old, with his whole life ahead of him, and yet his only regret was that he could not give more for the cause of liberty. His composure, his courage, and his sacrifice turned him into a legend. But here's the twist though. Hale died that day. The intelligence networks he helped establish didn't die with him. Washington learned from this failure, realizing the urgent need for organized, disciplined spycraft. Out of Hale's sacrifice grew the Continental Army's first real espionage system. Networks that would later tip the balance of the war in America's favor. So Nathan Hale didn't just die a hero, he became the symbol of American patriotism. And, in a subtle but powerful way, his death shaped the very strategy that would lead to independence. His story reminds us that sometimes, even in defeat, there can be victory. Fast forward 86 years to 1862. The United States was torn apart by a brutal civil war. Brother fought against brother. The Union and the Confederacy clashed on bloody battlefields from Virginia to Tennessee, and the casualty numbers climbed into the tens of thousands. It wasn't just a war over territory, it was a war over the very soul of the nation. And then, on September 22nd, President Abraham Lincoln made a decision that would forever alter America's moral and political landscape. He issued a preliminary proclamation, effective January 1st, 1863. All slaves in the Confederate States would be free. Now, pause for a moment and imagine the weight of that decision. Lincoln wasn't just thinking about morality, he was calculating the survival of the Union itself. He knew this proclamation could have dangerous consequences. Border states that still allowed slavery might abandon the Union. Political rivals could accuse him of radicalism, and Confederate leaders would surely use it as propaganda. But Lincoln also knew something deeper, that the war could not be won without redefining its purpose. Up until this point, the Union's main goal had been preservation, keeping the country together. With the Emancipation Proclamation, the war gained a higher meaning. It became a fight for human freedom. The immediate effects were complex. The proclamation didn't free every enslaved person overnight. Its legal reach extended only to areas under rebellion, not the loyal border states. But symbolically, it was revolutionary. Word spread quickly, carried by Union soldiers and whispered through plantation fields. Enslaved men and women began fleeing to Union lines in greater numbers, weakening the Confederacy's labor force and bolstering the Union's cause. Internationally, Lincoln's proclamation shifted the playing field. In Europe, nations like Britain and France, both considering recognition of the Confederacy, hesitated. Why? Because aligning with the South would now mean openly supporting slavery, a stance deeply unpopular with their citizens. Lincoln had not just transformed the war at home, he had reshaped its perception across the globe. And here's the long-term impact. This document set the stage for the 13th Amendment, which would finally abolish slavery across the entire United States. It gave moral clarity to the Union cause, inspired abolitionists, and strengthened the resolve of soldiers who now knew they were not only fighting for a united nation, but also for liberty. So, while the Emancipation Proclamation may not have freed every slave on that day, its power was undeniable. It was a declaration to the world that liberty and human dignity could no longer be ignored. Lincoln's pen had struck a blow as decisive as any cannon on the battlefield. Now, let's switch gears from politics and war to something much sweeter, an invention that changed the way people enjoy dessert forever. In 1903, an Italian immigrant named Italo Marchionni, living in New York, patented what we know today as the ice cream cone. Before this invention, ice cream was typically served in cups, glass dishes, or metal containers. Street vendors would hand customers scoops of ice cream in small glass bowls, and after finishing, the bowls had to be washed and reused. Imagine that on a hot summer day, dozens, maybe hundreds of customers and vendors scrambling to keep up with cleaning dishes. Not only was it messy, but it was also impractical and unsanitary. Marchionne's idea was beautifully simple. Why not create an edible container? Something that didn't need to be washed, that was convenient to carry, and that made eating ice cream even more enjoyable. And so, the cone was born. With his patent in 1903, he officially introduced a treat that would quickly become a worldwide sensation. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Marchionne wasn't the only one experimenting with edible cones. Around the same time, at fairs and expositions, other vendors were rolling thin waffles into cone shapes to hold ice cream. In fact, at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, the cone really exploded in popularity. The cone really exploded in popularity. Legend has it that when an ice cream vendor ran out of dishes, a nearby waffle vendor rolled his waffles into cones to help out, and the crowd loved it. From that moment, the cone wasn't just a novelty, it became the standard. Think about how revolutionary this was. Suddenly, ice cream wasn't confined to a dish. You could walk down the street with it in your hand, enjoying it on the go. It changed the culture of leisure, of fairs, of amusement parks. The cone became part of the fun. It was more than dessert, it was an experience. And as the 20th century rolled on, the ice cream cone grew into an icon. Companies started mass-producing cones, adding sugar, creating sturdier shapes, and eventually leading to innovations like prepackaged cones filled with chocolate at the bottom. Hollywood picked up the image to romantic dates at the soda fountain. Children laughing with ice cream dripping down their hands, carefree summer days all tied to this one invention. What's incredible is how such a small idea had such a huge impact. It's a reminder that innovation isn't always about giant machines, scientific breakthroughs, or political revolutions. Sometimes it's about solving a simple, everyday problem in a creative way. Italo Marchionne may not have known it at the time, but his ice cream cone helped shape not just dessert history, but a piece of cultural history. Over a century later, billions of cones are eaten every year across the globe. From local ice cream trucks to gourmet parlors, his idea lives on, delicious, practical, and universally loved. September 22, 1980, the Middle East ignites. On this day, Iraq, under the leadership of Saddam Hussein, launched a massive invasion of neighboring Iran. What began as a sudden attack would spiral into one of the longest and bloodiest wars of the 20th century, the Iran-Iraq War. To understand why this happened, we need to look at the tensions building for years. Iraq and Iran had long disputed control over the Shat al-Arab waterway, a vital channel for oil exports. At the same time, Saddam feared the influence of Iran's Islamic Revolution, which had just toppled the Shah in 1979. Iran's new leadership, under Ayatollah Khomeini, promoted a vision that threatened Saddam's grip on power and could inspire uprisings among Iraq's Shia majority. Borders, religion, and politics collided and war erupted. The fighting was brutal. Both sides used trench warfare, chemical weapons, and human wave attacks that shocked the world. Cities were reduced to rubble, economies were drained, and families were torn apart. By the time the war finally ended in 1988, hundreds of thousands of lives had been lost, and millions more were displaced. Yet, after all the destruction, the borders remained almost exactly the same as when the war began. But the consequences didn't stop there. The conflict reshaped global politics. It drew in foreign powers, with the United States, the Soviet Union, and regional players all providing weapons, intelligence, or funding to one side or the other. It left both countries weakened, setting the stage for Iraq's later invasion of Kuwait in 1990, and Iran's ongoing struggles with international isolation. Even today, the echoes of this war are felt. Veterans still carry its scars. Cities had to be rebuilt from the ground up, and the political tensions born in that era continue to influence Middle Eastern geopolitics. The Iran-Iraq War is a reminder of how quickly local disputes can spiral into global crises and how the cost of war is paid, not only on the battlefield, but across generations. September 22, 1994. Television history was made. On this day, NBC premiered a sitcom that would become one of the most beloved and influential shows of all time, Friends. At first glance, it seemed simple. 6 20-somethings living in New York City, figuring out life, love, and careers. But Friends quickly became more than just a comedy. It was a cultural phenomenon. The characters, Rachel, Ross, Monica, Chandler, Joey, and Phoebe, were not just fictional people. For millions of viewers, they felt like actual friends you could laugh with, cry with, and grow up alongside. The show's appeal was universal. It captured the struggles of young adulthood, finding an apartment, dating disasters, chasing career dreams, and building chosen families. It also set trends. Remember the Rachel haircut? That style swept across the globe in the 90s. The catchphrases to, "How you doing?" or "We were on a break" became part of everyday conversation. But Friends wasn't just entertainment, it reshaped television itself. It set the standard for ensemble casts, sitcom timing, and the way shows could connect emotionally while still being laugh-out-loud funny. By the end of its 10-season run in 2004, it had earned dozens of awards and cemented its place as one of the most successful TV shows ever created. Even decades later, Friends hasn't lost its magic. Reruns stream worldwide, new generations binge-watch it as if it were brand new, and Central Perk remains an iconic symbol of friendship and comfort. It's rare for a TV show to transcend time, but Friends did exactly that. So, when we look back at September 22, 1994, it's not just about the premiere of a sitcom, it's about the birth of a global cultural touchstone, one that continues to bring people together, laugh after laugh, year after year. And there you have it, September 22nd, a single day that witnessed bravery, moral courage, innovative ideas, brutal conflicts, and cultural milestones. From a patriot sacrificing everything for freedom, to a president reshaping society, to an invention that made life a little sweeter, to wars and television moments that defined generations, this day reminds us that history is never simple, and every date has stories waiting to surprise us. If you enjoyed this journey, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another dive into the hidden stories of history. Which September 22nd event do you find most fascinating? Comment below, we love reading your thoughts, and we might feature your comment in our next video.